What's going on, everybody? It's FREEDO here for Your Overwatch. Today I have a special video for you guys. Got into a call with up-and-coming YouTube content creator for Overwatch, SVB, who started a really awesome series where he placed a new account on an off role. He was GM, went into Gold and Platinum, and through that experience picked up on a whole load of community misconceptions and things that are keeping people stuck in their rank. So he goes over those a lot on his channel, which will be linked in the description. This is a series that has gone on for multiple videos, and he still makes other guides and stuff as well that I think you'll find useful. And also as well, he has a Discord server where he actively involves himself into community scrims, and it could be a good place for you to play in a bit more of an organized setting and even get some feedback from the man himself. So all that's linked in the description. And without further ado, let's get into the interview about ranked mentality, misconceptions, and more.
My name's SVB. I run a YouTube channel dedicated to Overwatch and educational stuff. A couple months ago, I made a new account. I'm usually a top 500 tank main. Because of the guides I make and stuff, I often get DPS asking me for advice and help. So I thought I'd make a new account and get to play DPS, make it a DPS only account, just so I could learn firsthand what it would be like being a DPS in certain elos and what pressure situations and stuff people get put in. I genuinely played as hard and as well as I could. Obviously being a tank main with no brain, I also had no aim. And I got put in gold, which is quite surprising when I finished my placements. I was a little bit bummed and I thought I'd place higher, but once I got there, it actually became, a huge learning experience for me just to see, actually, because I think one of the biggest things is that a lot of the community, obviously the vast majority of the community are in gold and platinum. And obviously when we're guide makers, we tend to focus on the higher echelons of play, what's the best things to do, what's the most optimal things to do, how the pros do it. But there's like this disconnect with the community who are in gold and platinum, and the kind of the game they experience is entirely different to the game that we experience or the game that we see and the game that Overwatch really is supposed to be. So yeah, just being in gold and platinum really gave me like a huge perspective on what it is that people actually go through, how frustrating it is, the sort of weird world that it inhabits in itself, sometimes the weird behaviors that just seem so counterintuitive but have become a sort of a norm in gold and platinum. So yeah, it was quite the eye-opener, really.
Yo, that's really cool because I get sent a lot of gameplay to review, and I go through spurts of doing a lot of review content, and then now I'm probably due to do a lot more, actually, and it's something I want to get back to. But it's interesting hearing from watching your videos is the stuff that you found that are like rules of the culture of those ranks that are wrong.
Yeah.
That's something that I like. Misconceptions is something that we on our channel did a lot over the years, and I always really love to try to tackle because it's surprising how much people assume about what they're supposed to do, yet it's not giving results, which is weird because in other games I think you very clearly know that your strategies are bad, but in Overwatch it feels like, for example, just to give you like a scenario that I see all the time where there'll be a bunker comp and they're spamming at a choke like Hanamura A.
Yeah.
And people 3 years down the line, like we made guides about this years ago, people still have no idea what to do about that, right? Like they don't really know. And there's a bunch of things they do wrong. Like for example, they'll take like Rein Zarya, but not full goats, but no Lucio, but no Diva to eat the spam, and then the math of the equation pans out so that they die before they get anywhere, right? They don't have speed, they can't eat, and they assume though, but we must have a Rein Zarya, right? Like there's no other option. We couldn't do anything else. Whereas oddly enough, they'd be better with like 4 DPS. If they just like all had mobility, get past the choke, start flanking, shoot from the side, just like we see the pros do, right? Like that would be a better strategy than the assumed 2-2-2 that a lot of people conform into. So that's like one example from me that I see, but I know you through your experiences and diving deep into the trenches there, you have a lot of experiences to share as well. So do you want to get into some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely, you hit the nail on the head where I think it's really weird and it's really difficult to sort of pin down, because I think one of the reasons that I got into making YouTube videos is that the shared knowledge that the community has is so scattered and it's so different that just some sections of the community have ideas that they've entrenched, like you said, they've entrenched so deeply in their psyche, and they think that this is the optimal play to Overwatch. But it's just not true. It just doesn't hold up. And I'm quite often when I get into these games, one of the things I'm always curious about learning is why people think certain things are a must. So like you said, people always play Rein Zarya. They don't seem to value the power of Lucio, for example, when they do play Rein Zarya. even though Lucio is one of the most key components with a sort of fat Ryan Zarya kind of comp, because without the speed boost, they're so easy to kill. And there's this weird taboo against playing goats, like it's, I don't know, cheating or lame or cheesing somehow. There's a really weird taboo around playing goats. And also just certain hero counters are really weird at certain elos. People just sort of see X hero and they'll decide that X hero must be the counter. They'll see like a bunker comp set up on a high ground and they'll be like, we need more damage, get a Reaper. Not really identifying that the problem isn't that they're not doing enough damage. The problem is that they're just not able to reach the enemy comp without even dying, and that they should probably just go for a more direct route like a dive comp rather than try to slow walk their way and then take this weird shield battle where you're always going to lose because you're the attacker and the defender's always going to have an advantage in that scenario. So I think that's really why I got into making videos, because it's so bizarre that people have this weird self-understanding that it's just, I don't know where it comes from really. And the anecdote I gave in my videos was that I was in this game on Horizon and we were just stuck on point A, and I was playing DPS and I just typed out in the chat, everybody was getting frustrated in voice channel like, oh, nothing's dying, nothing's happening, somebody switch, blah, 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 as is usual in comp games. Like I said to the tank players, like, guys, go in, I'll go in with you. I'm just waiting for you. I was playing Genji and they were playing Winston Diva. So theoretically, we had an excellent dive set up. And I just said, I'm waiting, you go in and I'll follow. And then the main tank just responded to me saying, no, you go in, you're supposed to make space for me. And I was just so shocked. I honestly, like, it kind of made me like double check, like blink.
Did a double take on it.
Yeah, exactly. I was like that, that meme with the blinking guy, like that was me. I was just, who would think that? But that was the thing. And when I heard that, I realized that there was a large section of people who, whether they believed it consciously or not, played the game that way, where their understanding was that DPS should be making space, for example. That's just one extreme example, but the fact that it had so permeated the psyche of that rank was so shocking to me, because again, we as an analysts, we think of the game in a certain way. It's so bizarre when you actually go down to a rank and people think of it in a completely different way, in a way that doesn't necessarily add up.
Yeah, you touched on a couple things there that I think almost go together, actually, and it surrounds tanks. And the weird thing is, I spoke to some other analysts and big content creators behind the scenes, so I know that this opinion is validated, not to throw anybody under the bus, but tank play in ranked is, in our opinion anyway, I don't know if you agree with this, but is the most behind the curve from where we expect it should be. Like, it's the most misunderstood role overall. And obviously, everyone can be bad at any role or good at any role, but tank play, because it's so game sense reliant and we're in a format that doesn't really promote game sense and teamwork until you get to the higher ranks, it's very difficult to learn. So to that extent, a lot of times tank players, they don't realize that what they're doing is getting outplayed. They assume their job is just to be somewhere, and then you go kill something and then we win, right? When in reality, the whole concept of making space, like you're saying, is their job. Like that whole battle of getting the team into position is what they should be concerning themselves with. And then that also ties into what you're talking about with GOATs, and why a lot of players in ranked either think it's bad or don't want to play it, is because I think the GOATs comp, when it feels like it's not working and you're losing some fights, it feels terrible because you have no range, right? It feels like you're not in the fight at all. Like, if you don't get your engagement pathing right with GOATs, you get destroyed. But as we see with the Overwatch League, right, even when those teams are getting shredded, well, when you see the overhead view and watch the ults and realize, oh wait, they're charging up the best support ults in the game. Even if they lose these fights, they'll eventually get the pathing right, gets a point, pop those ults and win, right? Like it's hard to see that macro sense of the game when you're in the moment getting shot and your Rhine shield's broken and everybody's dying in an instant, right? It's hard to really grip that. The game doesn't do a really good job of teaching you that. It doesn't teach you that really it's about the time banks and how you can manipulate that, and overall macro ultimate play or getting into space, right? All of these things are way more important than the medal system, which we do have, which is something like in month 1 of Overwatch, I was like, medals are BS, okay? Like, they don't tell you anything. And they've improved them slightly, but not really. And I don't really know how Blizzard fixes that, other than just everyone getting educated with the game more, but it's been years now, and I think a lot of players still struggle with some of these things that I feel pretty confident in saying are kind of basic, actually. And I don't mean to be rude when I say that, but it's fundamentals of tank play should be known much lower at the ranks than they are, if that makes sense. Like, it takes quite a long way, I think, until GM, frankly, until tanks really are like, all right, it's my job to get the team somewhere, and they're thinking of the game that way. Even at Masters, I think a lot of them have these misconceptions that I'm talking about, at least in my experience.
I'll start with the tank thing, because I do actually agree. Even as a main tank myself, I absolutely agree that I think tank is probably the worst played role in Overwatch, and also it's the most underplayed role. So it's really weird. Like, I think that's why there's such a dearth of tank players in Overwatch, because not only is it so misunderstood in most elos, it's also the least played role. So people have very little reference point. I think
it's the most impactful. It's like
I know
it does everything.
It's like,
yeah, go ahead, keep going.
It's one of the things that's like just like one main tank. Like, yeah, I mean, people really underestimate. I think everybody obviously wants to be the DPS getting frags, and I think that's partly the reason why tank is so misunderstood, is because most of the game's understanding is so kill-centric. It's all about whoever gets the kills is the king. That's the person who's carrying. That's the person who's winning us the game. Whoever it is who's got that little box in the final blows column, that's the person. But because of that, we get tanks who are just sort of. I think that's why you get so many off-tank players, because they don't want to be the person taking damage for the team. They just want to be the person doing damage, and they just want to be the Roadhog who's getting hooks and who gets that X little red skull on their screen that gives them validation, rather than be the person who makes space for someone else to get the kill and actually wins the team game overall, but it doesn't feel as satisfying as being the physical person who vaporized the enemy player. So there definitely is this really weird, I think, lack of knowledge of. I think it's probably because tank is as a role, it's not as well defined necessarily as the other roles. Your job is to sort of enable the rest of your team, shepherd them in some scenarios, drive them forward in other scenarios, and usher them back in other scenarios. So there's no real clear definition, I think. And it is very depressing, actually, when you get to a game and people just don't understand what tanks are supposed to do. I think most people just think that tanks are Bob, essentially. Where he's just like,
get in there, Ryan. Do something.
Yeah, exactly. You just sort of press the button. He runs on the point, and then that's it. Like, he just stands there, and that's the Ryan existing now. So that's definitely one thing that it baffles me, to be honest, why people haven't really seeked out understanding tank better. Then going on to the thing of goats, again, I think that ties in as well, is that people have a really poor misunderstanding for what's going wrong in a game. People really struggle to understand that if they're losing a fight, I think the first conclusion from my experience in Platinum and Gold, the absolute first conclusion everybody always draws is we're not killing stuff, and therefore it's the DPS's fault. That's usually 9 out of 10 times in my experience. The first conclusion people jump to is DPS needs to swap. That kind of leads into what you were saying about why people, when they lose 2 fights as goats, they suddenly are like, we need to swap, something isn't working. Not recognizing that it wasn't necessarily that they had the wrong tools for the job, that they just used the tools badly. It might be that you need a hammer to bash this nail in, but if you come in with a corkscrew, you're not gonna do the job, and then you're gonna blame the tool and say that, oh, you guys are wrong, you need to swap. And people really struggle to understand the sort of collective responsibility in a game of sort of, well, we're losing, but that's maybe because we went the wrong way together. We didn't coordinate a target to attack together. We didn't, coordinate our ults together. And yeah, I think people are very, very focused on XYZ is at fault, and not the idea that maybe we as a team could bank our ults together, and we might lose a couple fights, but eventually when we get it clicking, we'll win.
Yeah, I think teamwork is interesting, because most people see teamwork as something my teammates lack rather than a skill set I need to improve.
Yeah.
The weird thing about teamwork is most of it is intuitive the better you get at the game and the more aware you are. The number one thing that I give tips out for or notice in people's play is that they don't press tab or look around enough. When you do those two things, you're gaining information of what your team wants to do, and maybe you notice, oh, my Genji's going on a big flank, or our Ryan's hiding in a corner for a shatter. These things are like physical communication that at higher ranks, everyone just intuits and knows what to do, whereas at lower ranks, I notice oftentimes someone will be trying to go for a play, and it's like, they tell them, like, it could be a great type of idea or a good play or a good setup or something that can work, but it fails more often. They're like, oh, don't push up, right? In spots where in GM, everybody pushes up. They just know they have to push up together, right? So one thing that I usually tell people a lot of times is if you see your teammate feeding, a lot of times the right call is to feed with them
Yeah.
to at least like go in and try to make some magic happen, right?
Yeah.
Rather than a lot of times they sit back and like watch someone else try to make a play and then, well, that's not my problem. But in reality, being a good teammate is, you know, as D.Va, going in and saving that guy from death, you know what I mean? And being very active. Or there's a lot of these characters that I play, or like D.Va, Lucio, these characters that go in and out of the fight that way. And it's almost like a pure decision-making game sense type role. And it's something that I notice really lacks the lower down the tiers you go. So yeah, it's interesting. Like I wish there was a medal for being a good teammate and people realizing that that's something that you own. It's not everyone else's fault, right? It's something you can improve on.
There's this weird mentality a lot of people have when they get into a game, is that they play the game out of spite. And it's sort of this mentality of, I don't care if my teammate dies and I don't help him, because in the long run, somehow this person will lose SR and they'll stay stuck in their rank and I will climb. And I think people forget that that person is in your game only for this one game, and provided you're not in a rank like GM or Master, you're very, very unlikely to see that player again. So that person being in your game now is all that matters to you. Like, you shouldn't care if that person is an idiot or whatever they are, or if they're being stupid. Your job is just to enable them and make them have as good as a game as they can, so that you can have as good as a game as you can. And again, it's this sort of, you live and die by the same sword. You know, you're all in the game together when you're matched up as a 6. And yet people have this weird spiteful mentality of like, I don't want to let that guy win off my amazing carry. Obviously, people assuming that they can carry a game despite being in the rank as someone else. But also this weird, like, I'll let them die and I'll let them lose because they're being stupid and somehow it'll benefit me. No, the most benefit you'll get is making sure everybody in your team survives and everybody in your team does well. That's the only way you're going to win the game. So there's that. But then, yeah, I think one of the things I noticed that a lot of low rank players really fixate on disproportionately is stats. Because when you get to the higher elos, you almost, not that they're perfect, there's loads of horrible and toxicity going on there as well, but one of the things that you don't see people mention is, oh, XYZ has the medals, or I have an XYZ win rate or whatever, because I think they realize that the game is more than that, is more than just getting medals, and they understand the fallacy of the medals and stuff. But at lower ranks, people are so obsessed, I think probably because they lack any sort of understanding of what they're doing wrong. They don't have a reference point of what it is that's going wrong in a game. Like I said earlier, they don't really know how to identify what's going wrong in a game. And so their only solace is to look for medals. And I've seen people go really, really deep as well, as far as like how much healing they're doing per 10 minutes and whether that's a sort of a justification of how they play healer. And I always look at that and I'm always like, that honestly, like if someone came to me and were like, I'm healing 15,000 per 10 minutes, I'd be like, that is absolutely irrelevant to me. I couldn't care less how much you're healing per 10 minutes, like, because it's completely contextual. And in honesty, if you're winning a lot of fights and you're playing well, you're not going to heal a lot because your team aren't going to take too much damage. It's going to be a quick and efficient fight. The longer you poke and the more aimless things you do, the more you'll boost your stats, and you'll think that you're playing well when you're really not. So this is weird obsession with stats, and the game really leaves players out to dry. I think this is one area that the game really could either just do away with the stats system or find a different way to try and contextualize the stats. Maybe a sort of, you can see the stats of both teams in the game somehow, so you could compare. But yeah, the sort of, the current system just gives people this weird impression that padding your stats or somehow getting these stats is a vindication of what's going on, when it's just really completely based on context, and it's not a good reference point.
Right, and going back to how much I love misconceptions, one that I see sometimes, especially at lower ranks, is Ana players not realizing that they're one of the best counters to Pharah in the game. And they'll take these really safe positions to heal their whole team rather than also threaten the angle against Pharah. Now, that's not to say you should always go for duels as Ana, but her rifle is so good at pressuring down Pharah, even if you don't kill her, that it is a way to win the FPS taking space, angles game. And when you control those angles, then all of a sudden your team takes less damage, right? So that's a situation where you would have to heal less, because you're forcing the damage to do less, so you heal less at the same time, but you're winning the fight because of it. It's really counterintuitive, and there's a lot of situations where like Lucio does that as well. You know, controlling the enemy team so they can't get on you anyway is stronger than just letting that happen to you and then hoping you're gonna out heal it, because there's only so much healing you can do. Like the supports especially, that's probably the bigger support misconception that I see. But yeah, do you want to get maybe into more specifics of things you learned, or however you want to turn the conversation from here?
So there's sort of two specifics. I think that there's sort of a distinction, I would say, what I learned specifically in gold and what I learned specifically in platinum. And I'll just try and summarize it as to not tread over the same ground I did in my videos. So how I would summarize it is that gold is fundamentally the rank of mistrust, in that everybody mistrusts each other the minute they get into the game. And they end up doing things that are unhelpful to each other because they don't trust that they'll be helpful to each other. So just as we already talked about sort of briefly, the tanks don't make space for their DPS or their healers because they don't trust them to follow in with them. So therefore they just sit aimlessly at the choke and they don't do anything because they've learned over their course of their ladder experiences that they can't trust their teammates. And then as a consequence, there's less space for their DPS to work in, making their life harder. And then the tanks will go away thinking that, of course, all my DPS always suck. They never get any kills, not realizing that they're not making space for them. And then as a consequence, DPS learn to feel that their teammates are not going to help them in any way. They're not going to enable them in any way. So they just go off on their own all the time. They die really late or really staggered, or they engage really early and on their own. They pop ults when the fight is over. And they essentially feel like they have to put the team on their back and get 3 kills, or otherwise nothing is going to happen, because they mistrust their teammates. And then similarly, the healers mistrust their DPS to get kills, and then they end up spending a disproportionate amount of time trying to kill stuff rather than heal stuff. And then obviously their DPS die because people, and particularly with certain healers, and people have the impression that I hate Moira. I don't hate Moira, but certainly Moira is really guilty of this because she's so self-sustainable. She does a really good job of staying alive for herself while also being able to damage stuff. But it's really weak and inefficient damage. And then you end up out DPSing your DPS, and then you start believing that DPS in my rank sucks, so I have to DPS. That's why I DPS as Moira. Not realizing that by doing that, you're making your DPS's life harder, making it less likely that they'll get kills. So there's this weird self-fulfilling prophecy where everybody does this thing out of mistrust. It makes their own lives harder, but they don't realize it because everything they're doing only feeds into the impression they already have. And then in Platinum, I think there's a sort of really weird ego element to it all, where I don't know why it is in Platinum that this is the case, but people seem to perpetually believe they're better than Platinum when they're in Platinum. And more so than any rank I played in, people seem to always believe that they deserve to be in a higher rank, and that every time something goes wrong, it's everybody else's fault, and it's always the teammates' fault, and it's always somehow that they get the bad teammates, the other team get the good teammates. So I would say Platinum is this rank of ego where everybody fundamentally thinks that they're carrying all the time and that they couldn't do more, which obviously we understand is complete nonsense. Even Overwatch League players can do more, can do better. So for someone to be in Platinum and think that I couldn't do more is bizarre to me.
Definitely. I love the Moira example as well, because that kind of gives the other end of the spectrum of what I'm talking about, where there's some plays as a support that you have to make in the aggro sense, rather than always being passive and hope that your team, handles themselves. And then there's other times where, DPS Moira's out there. We've made videos about that as well, where they get kills but let their team die, so you lose the fight. There's so many situations like that, I think, in Overwatch, where that a player gets rewarded for doing the wrong thing in stats or in the feeling of how rewarding it is to get a kill yourself, rather than not seeing the big picture of that decision as losing the team fight.
Yeah, I think it's just the key thing is context is so important. I think most people forget it when they come to Overwatch, particularly when they come to guides and stuff. They want like a one answer fits everything sort of solution. They want to be told how to behave all the time in just one sentence, and then that should be enough. But it's the thing I always try to emphasize in my videos is always that it's not, one decision isn't always good all the time. And the phrase I often use is, getting away with the decision is not the same as making a good one. And I think that context is so important in Overwatch, because it's always shifting, right? Overwatch is a game that's always shifting, just based on what you're running, what the enemy team is running, where they're stood, where you're stood, what map it is, whether there's a payload next to you, whether it's a point that you want to contest. So much context is always shifting in Overwatch. so that you can't just give them like a blank solution, like you gave with like you said with the Ryan Zarya example as well. Theoretically, Ryan Zarya is a great tank combo. They work well, they supplement each other, and they complement each other very well. But that doesn't mean that in any given context they will always be the answer or they will always work. Even if you're theoretically doing the things you should be doing, even if you're theoretically as Ryan, you're trying to push forward, doesn't necessarily mean you're doing what the team needs you to do. And I think actually that leads to another point that I've noticed a lot in, I guess it applies to all levels of ladder, but particularly I think in the lower elos, where people think that they get a free pass if they play tank or healer from scrutiny. And I don't know if you felt this yourself, but I've noticed that whenever someone picks tank or healer, they automatically feel like that's good enough, like that's enough. I've done my job now. I picked tank or healer, the unwanted roles. And now everything that goes wrong is someone else's fault. Even if they don't recognize that they're playing the wrong healer for the scenario or the wrong tank for the scenario. So many people will sort of just pick Roadhog, for example. If you'll ask for a tank and someone, and you might already have a diva, for example, and some guy will go into spawn, pick Roadhog and be like, yeah, I did my thing. Not realizing that that's not even helpful. I'd rather you play something else so that we could work around it than play Roadhog Diva. There's no free pass just for picking the unwanted role, quote unquote. I don't know if you feel that way.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, that's always kind of been the case, and I think what it comes from is almost like an MMO mentality where healers aren't the playmakers, whereas in Overwatch, tanks and healers are the playmakers, and always have been, frankly. Even in metas where you could say Widow carried, tanks and healers still did a ton of work, and that's only increased over time, so much so that we've got Goats meta where damage is irrelevant. Like, you don't even need to pick them because tanks and healers can do so much together. So yeah, I don't know how to solve that. I've kind of tried over the years, but yeah, I agree. Like it's weird. It kind of goes back to what I said earlier, where that these players in these roles don't realize that they have huge plays to make and they're missing them, and it's not really until someone points them out to them. So I suppose it's on us though to make more videos to point out these mistakes. It is difficult though, because you need these contextual examples to show. Otherwise, you know, people just absorb one sentence lines of, oh, FREEDO said always shoot Pharah as Ana, but really what I mean is when the angle is appropriate, when you need, you know what I mean, when you need to do it, and there's so many different other flowchart points that you have to go down for that to be the case, right? And it's a hard play to make, requires you to multitask and do both. I'm not saying don't heal your team. I'm saying you have to do something better, right? Which goes for tank as well, where it is difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually quite funny because you were describing that you had to put in so many qualifiers and so many like, I'm not saying this, and it's sort of, that's a sad state that we're in, where you can't really make a statement without needing to qualify it because people will take it very, very literally. And again, the ignoring of context is a really big problem when it comes to Overwatch and trying to help people understand the game. When I talk to people, the advice I always give them is try to learn the game. Don't learn the exact thing I'm telling you at this exact moment. Try to learn the principle so you can apply the principle all the time rather than just do this and then go blankly forth and do it forever. Just trying to watch more Overwatch League, particularly. Trying to play more in organized manners, and that's why on my server I've hosted a lot of scrims, and I try to be there in the scrims and guide players afterwards, like what they did wrong and how they could, because I think playing in an organized manner is really what teaches people a lot better than running into solo queue over and over, and then each game you're almost encountered with a different problem with your teammates first before you even get to playing against the enemy team. You first have to get over this barrier of your own teammates and whether they'll even pick a comp that's somehow complementary to each other. And then you get into the game, and then you're learning, and then at the same time you're watching people feed and do stupid things while you're trying to improve your own play. So that's why I always encourage people to try and play in organized settings where they can at least be sure that their teammates are all on the roughly same page, they're all trying to help each other, and they're not going to be a hindrance, certainly. They're not going to throw or feed overtly. And then you can start to look at the sort of macro elements, the contextual elements of, okay, well, if I have X hero in my team, then I need to alter my behavior. And then if they have X hero in their team, I need to alter my behavior. I can't play the same hero in every single matchup.